Oh, you haven't?
No.
There's a lot of things you haven't heard today.
Stanford's companies in question, Madam Speaker, include 1, the Antigua-based Stanford International Bank; 2, the Houston-based broker-dealer and investment advisor Stanford Group Company; and 3, the investment advisor Stanford Capital Management. Let us note, Madam Speaker, that the Bank of Antigua was not included in the SEC investigation and is therefore not a party to the legal action filed by the Securities Exchange Commission. Madam Speaker, Bank of Antigua has already been taken over by the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank through a consortium of OECS banking interests and the government of Antigua and Barbuda. But the land in the name of Bank of Antigua, Madam Speaker, and correct me if I'm wrong, is in the land being acquired today? The land in the Bank of Antigua's name? Isn't that part of the schedule? For public purpose, that has already, Madam Speaker, been addressed by the proper authority, which is the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. So why are they acquiring the land that Bank of Antigua sits on? I don't understand it. Pursuant to the SEC's request for emergency relief for the benefit of investors, the U.S. District Judge Reed O'Connor entered a temporary restraining order, Madam Speaker, not a permanent one, a temporary restraining order, froze the defendant's assets and appointed a receiver to marshal those assets. Madam Speaker, the SEC's complaint filed in federal court in Dallas alleges that acting through a network of SGC financial advisors, SIB has sold approximately $8 billion of so-called certificates of deposit to investors by promising improbable and unsubstantiated high interest rates. These rates were supposedly earned, Madam Speaker, through SIB's unique investment strategy, which purportedly allowed the bank to achieve double-digit returns on its investments for the past 15 years. According to the SEC's complaint, Madam Speaker, the defendants have misrepresented to CD purchasers that the deposits are safe, falsely claiming that the bank reinvests clients' funds primarily in liquid financial instruments, monitors the portfolio through a team of 20-plus analysts, and is subject to yearly audits by the Antiguan regulators. The SEC's complaint also alleges, Madam Speaker, an additional scheme relating to $1.2 billion in sales by SGC advisors of a proprietary mutual fund wrap program called Stanford Allocation Strategy by using materially false historical performance data. According to the complaint, the false data helped SGC grow the SAS program from less than $10 million in 2004 to more than $1 billion, generating fees for Stanford Group, ultimately for Stanford, of approximately $25 million in 2007 and 2008. This did not happen, Madam Speaker, prior to 2004. 2007 and 2008. The fraudulent SAS performance was used to recruit registered investment advisors with significant books of business who were then heavily incentivized to reallocate their clients' assets to SIB's CD program. The SEC's complaint charges violations of the anti-fraud provisions of the Securities Act of 1933, the Securities Exchange Act of 1934, and the Investment Advisors Act and registration provisions of the Investment Company Act. Some of these pieces of U.S. legislation, Madam Speaker, is more than 70 years old. They're not new. They were around when Alan Stanford operated in Antigua and Barbuda, when he made great economic strides in the public interest under the watch of the Antigua Labour Party. But, Madam Speaker, we are only hearing about them now because of the regulatory incompetence of the UPP. The regulatory incompetence of the UPP that is bringing unnecessary international shame and embarrassment to this country. It is the Regulatory Commission of the Financial Services Regulatory Authority that has a fiduciary duty and responsibility to regulate all offshore banks operating in our jurisdiction. It didn't happen prior to 2004. We were praised and commended by the US and British authorities after we cleaned up our act, after we were blacklisted and we came to Parliament and we passed watertight legislation. We became a model jurisdiction for offshore banking, Madam Speaker. But you see, once again, it's the same case with crime, same case with tourism, same case with Sailing Week. Simple matter of a cricket stadium, Madam Speaker, that they can't even get right. We see the unfortunate situation of what worked well, what was a model jurisdiction under the Antigua Labour Party. Madam Speaker, look at what has happened, Madam Speaker. It has become a nightmare. It has become a nightmare for the country thanks to the incompetence and vengefulness and spitefulness of the UPP. But let's go back to the SEC, Madam Speaker, and the allegations against Alan Stanford. In addition to the emergency and interim relief that has been obtained, the SEC seeks a final judgment, Madam Speaker, a final judgment permanently enjoining the defendants from future violations of the relevant provisions of the federal securities laws and ordering them to pay financial penalties and disgorgement of ill-gotten gains with pre-judgment interest. Madam Speaker, this matter, as the Attorney General very well knows, it is before a U.S. court. It is being heard on Monday of next week. The SEC recognizes, Madam Speaker, the SEC recognizes that relief obtained so far as emergency and interim. And they're waiting on the court for a final judgment. But the same UPP that was clueless about whatever may have been going on right under their regulatory noses, stuffed with the tissue paper of mock justice, has all of a sudden become an expert authority on dealing with Stanford and handed down final judgment because Justin Simon is the law lords in the Privy Council or the Supreme Court of the United States, and he has finally handed down final judgment today.
Honorable Member, you know we do not use names in this House.
Pardon me, Madam Speaker? The Honorable Attorney General. The Honorable Attorney General, who believes that he is bigger than the U.S. Supreme Court, bigger than the OECS Appeal Court, bigger than the Privy Council. And he has us here today. All of us here today. What he said, Madam Speaker? He's coming for me. Madam Speaker, he said he's coming for me. Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, an act of violence? Is that a threat?
Take back what? I don't know what it means either. I see no threat in that. Maybe he's going to give you a ride home.
Madam Speaker, for 5 years, in all seriousness, because this is a very important day in the history, not just of the Parliament of this country, but in the Parliament of all the Westminster jurisdictions and democracies, what we are doing here today. Madam Speaker, they saw nothing for 5 years. They did nothing. My good friend, I have to say it.